Let me see you want me, baby. Let me see you do.
Tooltip! I have a tooltip video for you.
I've actually seen a lot of JavaScript tooltips in my day, and what they actually do is they use the resize event and an anchor, and they apply inline styles of pixel values to a tooltip. That's pretty crazy because CSS, just pure CSS, could do the same thing. So let's dig into that, shall we? So the markup for this is actually going to be extremely simple. You have a tooltip wrapper, which we're going to place position relative on, your tooltip component wrapper, which is going to be your markup that the tooltip grows from, which in this case, I'll just have a button that's hello. And the tooltip itself, which can be a div with any kind of markup that you want inside of it. I'll put hubba. For the focus state, I actually want to add tab index because divs by themselves are not actually focusable. So we can add that with tab index 0. And later on, I'm going to hook into this focus state on tooltip component wrapper and then style an adjacent selector, the tooltip, to toggle the visibility of that tooltip.
The markup has been completed.
Inherit the height of that HTML. Center that tooltip, baby.
As for the tooltip itself, I want to make it a black background, very simple. I was about to do CSS and JS right there. I'm glad I stopped myself. And with a white color, give it a border radius on all sides. Border radius 4 pixels. And I get the padding of 8 pixels. Perfect. Now the reason I use pixels is I usually just let some sort of processor convert that to rems later on for accessibility. So rems are good for zooming in. And when you press Control or Command plus and minus, it zooms in on the page, and using rems is just a very flexible way to help everything scale. If you wanted to add an arrow, there are definitely tons of ways you can do a triangle. You could do clip path, border, rotate a square, though I'm going to do 2, just to show you the differences and the advantages of both. To get a square, all we have to do is add a pseudo selector. This pseudo selector is basically a free element. There's before and after that you get on every single element. It's pretty freaking cool, I'm sorry. And the way to activate it, or at least to show it on the page, is to use content with empty quotes. I'll give it some height, I'll give it some width, I'll inherit the background from the parent, which is this black on the tooltip. Once we add some positioning values, position absolute, it will then show at the top left of the page, which is weird, right? We want it to show within the tooltip. See that little thing, the little ditty in the top left? Yeah, not good. So I'll just give it some space so you know where it is. Yep, definitely right there. Okay, now a triangle is not a square. Did you know that? I know, this might be a little shocking for some people. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the tooltip background and mask half of that square. So we need to rotate it first. 45 degrees, because we want that point to be up like that. Yes, okay, cool. But the weird part is it's not even related to my tooltip at this point. And that's because position relative isn't on the container. Now it's going to stick to that tooltip. It sort of landed right under the U because of this top 20, left 20. But we want to make sure that it's flush with the bottom edge and right smack dab in the center. So I'll do top 100%, left 50%. To center it a little bit better, we want to specify translate -50% 0. It was a little hard to tell because it was just 4 pixels that it was moving, but if I did increase the size to maybe 24 pixels, you would see that it's still centered. And if I removed that translate -50%, yeah, it would be all the way over there. I'll shrink that little bad boy over again. Shrink that guy. Cool. So now I actually want to make sure that the center of that square is moved up half, so we can hide that part of the square. So on our y-axis of the translate value, -50%. And the translate only translates a percentage of that particular child element, as compared to the positioning values, which calculate the width and height of the parent. There is one downside to this. If you have If you have a transparent background, the square would actually show through, and you don't want that at all, right? You want it to just still be a triangle. So to get around that, there's the second method of having a triangle border. A lot of the properties would stay the same, but let's just keep it a little bit simple and pare it down a bit. We don't want the background since we're going to be using border. We don't even need the height and the width because we're going to be using border, which actually takes up height and width. We're going to put a transparent border on all sides. It's actually just going to have a color on one side. I'm going to say top color. I believe it's the top color. Then we're going to use the same transparent black that we used in our tooltip. Yes! Awesome. It's having the same problem where it's 8 pixels width because of the border, but it's left 50%. So in order to center that, we can just bring over that transform, translate, negative 50%, 0. X-axis, negative 50%. Yeah. Y-axis, 0. Yeah, nice and centered. Beautiful. Oh, and just to demonstrate where the borders are actually showing up, if I put border bottom color, it would have a triangle that's pointing. Now we'll move on to the juicy stuff, which is the positioning of the tooltip. Position relative is not what we want because we want to take that tooltip out of the flow of the document, but also have it anchored to the tooltip wrapper. So I'll put position absolute on the tooltip just to show that there's no anchor at this point. If we specify tooltip wrapper, position relative, we've then established tooltip wrapper as the anchor. Though top 0, left 0, that's not what we want. It's saying the top edge of that tooltip is aligned to the top edge of the tooltip wrapper, and the left edge, yeah, you get it. What we could do instead is make sure that the bottom edge of the tooltip is aligned to the top edge of the wrapper, and then also center that tooltip using left 50%. Well, that's definitely not what we want either. But all you got to do is add transform, translate, negative 50%, 0, and you got it. In order to give space between the button and the tooltip, you could potentially add in translate here. So you could say negative 12 pixels, and that would move it up just a little bit. Though I like to keep my transition states and my spacing or layouts separate. So I'm actually going to use margin bottom. And we'll say, oh, I want to keep it pretty far away. How about that? I know that the arrow is 8 pixels, and I know that I want it to be 8 pixels from the button, so 16 pixels is perfect. What if I have a lot of text? What's going to happen? So if I add hubba hubba, dooba, doobie, doober, doo, what's going to happen? That looks extremely terrible. So what do we do about that? You can actually add in a max width, and guess what? Nothing's going to happen. Yeah, nothing. It stays the same. That's because it's sort of respecting the tooltip wrapper.
What if I don't want it to respect the width of that tooltip wrapper? Huh.
And if I specified width 100%, that's relative to the container, not going to get us what we want. So we can break outside of that and check the window width, which is VW, viewport width, and that includes the scroll bar. So if I do shrink this tooltip, it will start to respect that window width, but since it's including the scroll bar, I actually get another scroll bar in return. You can either set it to a much smaller value, say 80 VW, or you could be a little bit more specific and do something like calc 100 VW minus some kind of gutter that you wish to create, 32 pixels. Now we don't get that horizontal scroll bar, and we sort of get gutters on the left and the right, so it doesn't look like sort of a broken layout. Though to keep it a little bit simple, I would rather just do 80 VW, because at this point, we don't know the width of the scroll bar. It could be something even crazier. If you wanted to center the text within that tooltip, you don't have to go all crazy. All you got to do is text align center. Boom, and you're done.
Oh, hey, would you like to learn about tooltip animations? Oh my, I'd love to learn about some tooltip animations. Okay, let's do it.
Animating the tooltip is pretty simple. You can't do display none, display block because those aren't actually transitionable, but you can do opacity. So opacity 0 to opacity 1 is a transitionable element. Though the weird part about that is if an element is opacity 0, you can still interact with it. You can still click it and select it, but it's not there. To get around that, you can do visibility hidden, and that just prevents it from being clickable or anything like that. The next question would be, what interaction states do we hook into? That's where that adjacent selector really comes into play. When hovering over the tooltip component wrapper, you can select the sibling, and the direct sibling of that tooltip component wrapper is the tooltip itself. I'm going to use an ampersand, which is all sassy. Oh, well, I already did use an ampersand, but for those not familiar with Sass, an ampersand just selects the selector that you're already on, which is, in this case, tooltip. I want to tie into the focus state as well, so I'll put a comma there and then add in the focus state. The opposite of opacity 0, opacity 1, and you can have, mid values like 0.5 and all that. For visibility, the opposite of that would be visible. When we hover or focus over the button, hello, we get our tooltip, which is awesome. To get it to smoothly come into play, you would specify a transition on your default state, which is extremely important. Opacity, let's give it 200 milliseconds. Comma separated, visibility 200 milliseconds. And if we hover over, what do we get? Oh, yeah. Perfect. What if we wanted some direction, some motion with that action? Well, this Y value here is what we could hook into. So I'm going to make it a pretty extreme value.
I've been watching this tooltip video for a while, and I think that guy's gonna run into some problems with his vertical placement of the tooltip. How's this little Jimmy Two-Time gonna get out of this one?
If I don't nuke that 12 pixels, yeah, it's going to be shifted 12 pixels downward. So let's nuke it, but also keep that negative 50%. Nuke it to 0. If I hover over the button, nothing's going to happen. It's still, oh, that's really bad because we didn't specify transform to transition. So if we put transform down here, 200 milliseconds, and hover over our button, oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's a work of art. We're almost there. I actually wanted to grow from that button just to show a little bit tighter relationship between the two. If I put in scale, I like very subtle values, so I'll keep it 0.75. That's actually pretty extreme. I like to separate my values like this in this stacking order just because it's very easy to read for me rather than being on one line. I'll put in scale 1. Again, 0 is the smallest, is hidden, baby. And 1 is completely visible in full size. So yeah, there we go. It's growing. It's growing from the bottom. Yes, hello. Which is awesome. That's what we want. And I got one more trick to show you. If your designer is very evil, they would add a shadow and an arrow. But box shadow isn't the solution, and I'll show you why. So your designer was like,
Madam Freville requires shadows on her tooltips. What do you say to that, developer?
I'll adjust the styles a little bit just so that the shadow shows through really well and make the tooltip white, and the text, well, the text is already default black on the page, so I don't need to specify color. I'm going to set the arrow back to white, or to inherit the color, which I can't do, so I will just do color white. And if I hover over, oh, you can't see anything of growth. Let's add the shadow to that tooltip. So I can show you what's going on, because box shadow isn't actually going to work for our use case. I'll make it a very extreme value. Very extreme.
Okay, what's it gonna be?
Oh, that spread. Oh my gosh, you caught me. I was actually applying the spread instead of the blur. So do you see what's going on? I can add a box shadow, but it doesn't actually respect that arrow. So what we can do instead is use filter, and filter is actually really smart. It traces the outline of the shape and applies a drop shadow based on that. So instead of box shadow, we'll use filter drop shadow. The values are a little bit different, and I actually haven't used it in a while, so this comma separation might not even be a thing, but we'll find out. It didn't even save it. Yep, it wasn't a thing. I missed a parenthesis. Yeah. So you can see that it's actually respecting the shape of the arrow in the tooltip. This will be saved on Codepen, so if you want to check it out, it's on Mimo Duo's Codepen. And if you want to go a little bit more in depth about the positioning values that I use to get this tooltip, bottom 100%, left 50%, I go over all the different permutations of that within a video that I'll link within the description. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back. If you want to talk about anything, Monster Hunter, K-pop, CSS, let me know down below.
Get crazy, yo. That's right. We can do it. We can do it. Oh.